Hello, BookTube. You know, that rapid fire book tag that I did a while ago in 2 minutes has been bugging me because so many of the questions on there deserve the long, nattering Grandpa Simpson style tedium that you've come to expect from this channel, and I didn't give it to them because I was busy getting them done in rapid fire succession. So I thought that I would give you the extended Blu-ray answers to some of those questions. And the first one I was going to start with was the first question, which is printed versus ebooks. And then I saw Matt at Turn the Page did a video on that same subject just today and called for a response video. So in addition to being my first extended Blu-ray cut, this will also be my response video to him. In his video, he talked about how he got an e-reader with every intention of using it and then just drifted away from using it. And that he knows a lot of people who've done the same thing. And that experience is reflected in the latest polls and surveys that also show that e-reader use is either flatlining or on the decline among American and British users. And I think that's a shame. I would hate to see that produce fewer ebooks. I would hate to see that cause ebook innovations to stagnate because I believe my vote is certainly for them, for electronic books. It's, in my opinion, much preferable to printed books, which is, I know, given my background of this video, a little bit strange to say. But I thought I'd go through why in a non-rapid-fire fashion. And as usual when I'm trying to make a decision like this, I break things down pro and con on both sides of the question and see which list is longer. And for printed books, I have three things that they do. Three superiorities. And Matt touched on a few of these himself. The first one is that they require no external power source. They just are. They're just objects. So you pick it up as long as you've got light to read, you're fine. The second one is their delivery mechanism never needs to be updated. The same actions that will gain you access to a hardcover book now will gain you access to that same hardcover book in 50 years and also 500 years ago. That never changes. Their access, the use, never changes. And the third one is something that Matt mentioned. He's not the only one I've heard say it either. In fact, it was the title of a book. The books do furnish a room. There's something tactile, something satisfying about not only holding them, but also displaying them. Even if you don't have a lot of company. Even if you're, for instance, a tedious old man whose company is mostly illiterate canines. There's still something comforting about having them around on your walls, on your shelves, looking at them like old friends, like old experiences, which is exactly what they are. I don't deny any of that. But then we move on to ebooks and their superiorities, and I think you'll find, at least I did when I made this list, that the list is much longer. The first one is something that Matt mentioned, storage. And people typically mention this in terms of vacation. If you're going on vacation, you fill your e-reader with books rather than load your suitcase with printed books. But storage is true at any time. It's not just vacation. One of the uncomfortable realities of reading that ebooks have made us aware of, that we could perhaps ignore before they showed up, is just what percentage of the books we read are dispensable. That we read them for curiosity or to keep up with an author or because they looked good or even because what's the booktube term, a cover by? And then they don't mean anything to us and we get rid of them. They go to church sales or they sit on shelves and are never touched again. When you start to get ebooks, you start to realize just how large a percentage of the books you get fall into that category, at least for me, and I bet for a lot of people. Dispensable books, books that you're never going to read again, and that now, if you've bought a physical hardcover, well, now you're stuck with it. You have to figure out what to do with it. You have to move it around from house to house, from shelf to shelf, from room to room. You have to clean it, and either that or you have to box it up and schlep it to the nearest charity shop. It's with an ebook, you don't have that problem. It takes up no space at all. So you're none the worse for having it. And it's often cheaper than the hardcover, so you're not out of pocket much for the experiment. And number two is along those same lines, environmental. Printed books require the raising and pulping of entire forests for their paper stock, and that's wasteful. And it's extra wasteful because of what I meant of the first point. A lot of these books are totally dispensed with. I mean, you don't have to spend time around in the Goodwill storage bins like I do to see the end product of quite a few books. Most of them, they don't find loving homes. They find refuge dumps. And the third point is price. Their ebooks are cheaper than hardcovers. They're still astronomically more expensive than they should be. But almost all classics are free. Almost everything that's out of copyright is free on ebook. That's not even remotely true in printed books. Even second and third hand printed books cost you money. And they show their wear, whereas the Project Gutenberg or whatever doesn't. And then the fourth one is a little intangible, but I still cite it anyway, and that's elegance. There's an elegance to a metal and glass slate. There's even an elegance, but despite the fact that pundits always say otherwise, I think there's an elegance to the look of it. People on the subway, people in the library, holding one of these things with a faint, lovely glow of blue on their faces. There's that element to it. Books are, if you take a step back and look at them, kind of ugly. Even the prettiest ones are lumps of paper and paste, and this isn't. And the next one is note-taking. I don't know how many of you fall into my category, but I take lots of notes on what I read. And the notes that you take on an electronic book are transferable, they're emailable, they're searchable, they're infinite. With a printed book, you're limited to the size of the margins. And with electronic books, you could write a note that's a novel long. You could write one that's 1,000 pages long. The e-books themselves are set up to handle anything, and the stuff is fightable. You don't have to go. You could make a Word document on your desktop and simply port over all your notes all the time. And the next one is mainly a reviewer thing, but it definitely works if you are a reviewer, and that's searchability, something that even the best indexed nonfiction book and no novel has, which is the ability to find something when you're looking for it in a hurry. As a reviewer, I can say that is an absolute godsend. If you want to know the first time that Uncle Tolliver appears in a book, or when Stoneleigh Court is mentioned for the first time, in the old days you had to do a lot of thumbing. And you often got it wrong. Even if you thought you were right, the author would certainly write a letter saying, "Oh, Uncle Tolliver appears 20 pages earlier. If apparently your reader doesn't know that." In electronic books, that's not true. You can call up anything and find it easily. And my last point is help. Electronic books offer help to their readers, and printed books don't. A printed book is simply there, like a brick or a pumpkin. It just sits there. If you don't know the meaning of a word that a character uses, you're out of luck. You have to go to another printed book to find it. If you don't know when and what the significance was of the Treaty of Ghent, you're out of luck. Your reading experience will need to be interrupted while you go and determine what that is, if you're persnickety enough to think it's necessary, or if the novel or nonfiction work makes it necessary. If a character in a novel is having a knockdown, drag-out fight with another character and mentions the Myers-Briggs test and you don't know what that is, well, in that scene, it's obviously going to be crucial. You have to know what it is. The other character knows what it is. The author knows what it is. If you don't know what it is, you're stuck. But not with an ebook. With ebooks, you can simply find these things. You can press and hold and get them identified right there in the text. Doesn't take a second. And they all come that way now. If you're reading a printed book and the font size is bothering you, you're stuck. That's it. It comes in one font size. Not printed books. Printed book, you can change the font size, suit yourself. If you're reading a printed book and your eyes are feeling a little tired, or you're feeling like being read to, you can switch it over right there in the text and have it start reading to you. Almost all of them come that way now. And the objections that I've heard from people over time about ebooks have been and continue to be just a bit on the silly side. I remember I was in the dubious position of wanting to sell one of these things to an old friend of mine, a blue-haired, well-heeled back bay matron here in Boston, who was thinking about going over to ebooks. And she said what a lot of my friends did 5 or 6 years ago. They said, well, if you don't object, well, we thought you would. So if you don't object, maybe there's nothing to object to. And she was fighting me tooth and nail on every single point that I've raised here. And at one point, she said, well, but it needs electricity. And I said, yes, it does. But it lasts for, 9 hours on a battery charge, 8 hours on a battery charge. And she said, well, what if I don't have access to electricity? I said, well, when's the last time in the last 25 years that you didn't have access to electricity for 9 straight hours? And she said, well, I guess that's true, but what if the Northeast power grid gave out? Forever. And I just stared at her. And eventually, after about 30 seconds, she batted her eyelashes and said, I'm being a little silly, aren't I? And she got an e-reader that day. And like Matt's friends, she used it for a while and then stopped and went back to books. Now, when he's talking about the benefits of holding a book and seeing them on the shelves, he mentions habit as a possible reason why that might be so appealing. And I think that hits the nail on the head. Books have had 500 years to dig themselves into the collective consciousness of human society. They've had 500 years to become part of our culture in a way that ebooks have not. Ebooks are brand new. We all have lived through their lifetime. They didn't exist until just comparatively recently. But they are, in my opinion, and as this list shows, much better. They are an improvement on printed books. The only reason that printed books have been called perfect technology for 500 years is because they had no competition. I assure you that the same thing was said, that same perfect technology comment was said about the Codex, and before that the scroll. It's always said when there's no competition. Now there is competition, and it's a product that is superior. An electronic text that's alterable, searchable, findable, helpable, stackable, is superior in every way to a printed book, except that the point that Matt makes, which is that you can't display them. No one knows what ebook you're reading, including on the subway. If you're reading a book on the subway, that used to be my pride and joy, to go onto a subway and surreptitiously see what people were reading. And everyone's on their phone now on the subway, so I don't see anyone reading. But they are still reading. And they're reading in silence, and they're absorbed. And that means that the one big worry that I had about ebooks when they first arrived is that they would not be able to simulate the feeling of being lost in a book, which is one of my favorite things about reading. I'm sure it's one of yours. And they do. It turns out that feeling, that thing that the human brain does, has nothing to do with the means of delivery. It has nothing to do with the technology involved, whether it's paper or pixels. That is a human thing. And it could be done anywhere, at any time, I'm sure, on any kind of technology. So that part isn't lost. And all the things that support that part support it better with ebooks than with printed books. So there you go. There's my Jeremiah ad on the subject. And we can count this also as a response video to Matt. But in his video, he calls for other response videos, and I'd love to see them too. So let me hear what you have to say on the subject, and let him hear too. Thank you, BookTube.